Hello, everyone. This is amazing. Like, what a turnout. It's incredible. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Eli Lieberman, the Executive Director of the Washington State Green Bank. And thank you. Welcome to our first stakeholder work group. And really, this is our introduction to Washington. So we're just so thankful for you to be here. Hello to everyone online. Thank you for joining us all over Washington State. Really appreciate it. I think we are going to do a quick overview of the agenda to get started. Oh, I have the power. Yeah, okay. So it's a quick rundown of the day. We'll have a couple breaks scattered in here. We've got the breakout sessions. We have lunch, a little bit of logistics. We are in the 9-0 space here at the Seattle Climate Innovation Hub, which is this incredible partnership between Seattle Office of Economic Development, Virtue Lab, the University of Washington. It's this incredible space for climate leaders to all come together, and we're really thankful that they hosted us today. For those in person, if you need to use the restroom, just go the door where you came from. That's where you'll find that. I believe that the Blue Angels are practicing from 11 a.m. to 1, so it could get loud, just as a FYI for people in person. And I believe that's everything for logistics. People online will be able to go into breakout sessions for you all as well, so please stick around for that. Okay, the Washington State Green Bank, let's get started. So what is the Washington State Green Bank? Well, we'll get into this in a bit more detail as we keep going. But in short, we are a 501c3 nonprofit mission-driven financial institution that was created in about 2023 into 2024 with a great partnership from the Department of Commerce, the City of Seattle, and then our initial funding from the Washington State Climate Commitment Act, which is our carbon pricing program. But before we go into a little bit more about what is a green bank, I wanted to sort of set the stage a bit. No matter what we're talking about when we talk about clean energy or decarbonization, from a residential homeowner to a big utility scale system, ultimately what we're talking about is a form of project finance. And the thing with clean energy is often the funds need to be paid upfront to the contractor. And then the benefits accrue over time, the savings from the utility bills. So this is a particularly interesting thing about clean energy. So there's a lot of different terms that I just want to kind of get us going on. One of them is the project's capital stack. And what that is, it's the combination of grants or rebates or equity or loans that allow you to pay that contractor up front to get the work done, because they unfortunately won't take payment over time as you're accruing those savings. So you have to provide that money to them up front. Another thing that can really dictate the overall cost and if a project works or not is the terms associated with the debt. And that's the amortization of a loan, so how long it's outstanding, and then the interest rate. Because ideally, we want to structure these capital stacks with a combination of equity grants, loans, where the savings on any individual project is greater than what the debt is. So that's just kind of a foundation of ultimately everything we talk about comes down to helping pay a contractor to do the work. So it's really important that we understand how that works. So what is a green bank is a really great question, and I don't think anyone really has the perfect definition of it. But ultimately, what they are mission-driven institutions that look at their given geographic region. So in the case of the DC Green Bank, it's the city of DC. In the case of the Connecticut Green Bank, it's the state of Connecticut. And in the case of Washington Green Bank, it's the state of Washington. They analyze the market and they look, where are clean energy projects not being installed, whether in a person's home or in a solar on an industrial facility or in agricultural lands, and they try to understand, why is that happening? Why is project finance not working there? And then they look to deploy tools that will allow that to begin to happen. So I think this is a little washed out here in person, but green banks are a movement that I would say really started in the East Coast. You can see this massive cluster there. And they sort of came out of ARA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. And that's where we see the New York Green Bank, the Connecticut Green Bank, Michigan Saves really popping up. And these organizations to date have leveraged billions and billions of dollars of public, taking public sector money and leveraging with private sector capital. And I think it's really exciting to see that the wave is slowly making its way out west with the Washington State Green Bank, the Nevada Clean Energy Fund, the Colorado Green Bank, all getting started right around the same time. So it's really cool that we're sort of finding these things making their way out west. So green banks come in a lot of different flavors. They can be fully public. That would be like the New York Green Bank. It's a division of NYSERDA, which I think in Washington terms would be like a UTC Commerce hybrid. They can be quasi-public. That's like the Connecticut Green Bank. They receive appropriations. Well, we have someone from Connecticut. They'll talk about that more later. They can be independent nonprofit green banks. That's like the Washington State Green Bank. That's like Michigan Saves. That's like the Nevada Clean Energy Fund. There's pluses and minuses, I think, to all the different models, and that's a subject for like a college seminar, so we won't go into it now. But ultimately, as we were talking about, they do, I think, really two core functions. One is this idea of like lowering the borrowing costs, making project finance more accessible in their given geographic region. So that's, getting interest rates down, getting into projects that traditional lenders aren't normally looking into. But there's this other side, which is that we need to ensure that there's a marketplace for clean energy so that, there's an incentive for more contractors to come in to build these projects. So green banks can often will really focus on that market pull side. So it's supporting a project pipeline, building really qualified projects across the state that they can help give to lenders. Working with contractor networks is another way. Michigan Saves, for example, has 1,200 certified contractors in their network, and that generates a pipeline annually of over $110 million just in residential. And that requires no work from any of the lenders. It's all driven by those contractors. So that's a really powerful way that green banks can build that marketplace for clean energy. And then project types, what do they work on? It's, everything that you could imagine. Solar panels, energy storage, zero emissions, so electric school buses, geothermal, electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's all the things that we love and care about. Here are a couple of the tools that green banks will use on more of the financial side as opposed to that contractor market pull side. One of them is credit enhancements. So this is de-risking a lender's investment. So this can be done in a couple ways. One of them is loan loss reserves. This is what Michigan Saves does. So in residential homes, they're really dedicated to the idea that we don't want people using credit cards for their clean energy investments. So they work with credit unions and then provide this credit enhancement that's a loan loss reserve that allows them to lend quickly when people have an emergency to replace their heater, or even not an emergency if they want to do solar panels and not have high interest rates charged. You could do loan guarantees, you could do interest rate buy downs. These are all examples of this credit enhancement idea. So this is really getting that leverage on public sector dollars. And then they can also lend off their balance sheets themselves. But again, it's really this idea of we're trying to uplift all the lenders in a state, get leverage on our funds. So it's not often that a green bank would lend the full project cost. They would often come in and say like a subordinated second position with a lower interest rate. So that's really going to allow that lender to feel more comfortable being the primary source of capital in a deal, because if something were to happen, the green bank will be the first to absorb the loss. And that's just going to allow this project finance to expand into more communities. So there's a lot of powerful tools. Another one that green banks are starting to think about as we see the need for more and more contractors in the clean energy space is working capital loans to contractors, because often they're having to work with these either state-run or utility-run rebate or grant programs that don't pay until after the project's installed. So the contractor might have to use up a substantial amount of its working capital, bridging that rebate for the state agency or utility, which if you were a small contractor trying to start could be prohibitive potentially from entering a new marketplace. So a green bank could provide a working capital loan to a nascent contractor. So lots of really, really cool things that green banks can do. This is just a fun slide that I stole from my friends at S2 Strategies. And it's just about this idea of like how it kind of trickles down from the state to local to the green bank level, where state governments play this great coordination role that help provide funding, make connections, really make the ecosystem holistic. They work with the green bank, local governments that may have less access or less knowledge on clean energy expertise to help them understand what the option is. And then when it comes to actually getting the projects installed on the ground, being a trusted source of project finance with the contractors providing technical assistance, that's where green banks really thrive. So it really flows nicely between state to local to green bank. And I think, in there is utilities, in there is contractors, all sort of like making their way down this. Yes, of course. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's how it all works. Um, and I think one fun thing about green banks is that once they reach a certain point, they become self-sustaining. So say we were eventually capitalized with Climate Commitment Act funds, we would live on in perpetuity long after the Climate Commitment Act had sunsetted, because what we're doing is, we're lending out money, they'll revolve back. The loan loss reserves, as the loans pay out, we can reuse those again. So they become self-sustaining, which is really exciting. So that just means we can continue to provide affordable housing and energy burden relief. We can continue to increase the quality of life in homes and have them be a healthier place to live. We can continue to create jobs and workforce development. All this is possible with a self-sustaining green bank, which is awesome. So quick timeline here. We were formed or the idea came in 2023 when we were sort of in Inflation Reduction Act mania with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was a $27 billion program for $7 billion of it was for states and solar for all, but $20 billion of it was for sort of quote unquote green banking activities. And we saw that there wasn't really an organization in Washington that was actively looking to, bring in a big slug of that money. So state leaders in Olympia prioritized the development of the Green Bank. The Department of Commerce and the City of Seattle, we're so thankful to both of them, really took it on themselves to keep pushing this forward. And they were able to form and spin out the Washington State Green Bank. And then we're so thankful to the legislature that provided us with our initial startup money in 2024. And then I was brought on board in 2025. So before the Green Bank got going, we did complete a market scan, really thanks to Commerce again in the city of Seattle, about whether or not we needed a Green Bank. And then obviously, yeah, the short answer is yes. But what we found was that there was fragmented financial landscapes in Washington. We have a couple really great lenders doing clean energy lending like Craft 3 and Puget Sound Cooperative Credit Union. But the problem that we're talking about is billions of dollars. So, and they're operating in different landscapes. So how can we bring in and centralize more lenders? As we were saying, lenders might face capital constraints. Again, billions of dollars of need out there. Contractor uncertainty. This is something I've talked to Puget Sound Energy and the city of Seattle City Light about, how it's hard sometimes to get contractors involved in these programs if, arbitrary lines on the map of like, we're in this county, we're in this city, we're in this utility territory can make it very difficult for them. So that can be a barrier that we could overcome. That working capital to help overcome workforce development, split incentive, all these things that we do kind of know of. So these are the things that we're really looking to help overcome as the Washington State Green Bank. I sort of already talked about this, but we have an incredible policy framework to work off of in Washington. I think we're really unique. We have our Clean Energy Transformation Act, we have the Clean Building Standard, and this slide just quickly on just energy efficiency and building decarb alone, not even talking about clean energy, not even talking about zero emissions transportation. We have 3.4 million residential properties statewide. 43% of those properties are older than 40 years, and 40% rely on combustible heating. So, that's over 1 million buildings that we need to get to there for heating alone. Commercial, we have 85,000 commercial buildings, 90% of them less than 50,000 square feet, and it's those little guys that will really need help with financing with the building performance standard. So just a massive market need. And then this just kind of shows you a little bit of the situation we're in right now. We were really hoping to receive a bunch of that Inflation Reduction Act money, but that is being a little slower to come out than we had hoped. So we did receive the Climate Commitment Act funds of $800,000, but you can see that when Minnesota created their Green Bank in 2023, they provided it with a $45 million appropriation. The Colorado Green Fund, the Colorado legislature provided it with a $35 million appropriation. So we are starting from a bit of our balance sheet is a bit smaller than the other green banks around the country that were formed right about the same time. And then this lastly is just a slide about ways that green banks can find funding. It's sort of important that you match the sources and the uses of the funding. If you're attracting private capital, potentially borrowing from a bank or a family office, you're gonna have limited uses of that. You wouldn't necessarily be able to use it in that credit enhancement capacity because it would be too exposed to risk. But if you receive funding from, say, a government appropriation, then you can absolutely do that credit enhancement function. Philanthropy obviously could be great for program-related investments like Michigan Saves and the Kresge Foundation did this incredible PRI where they did their residential program, but that didn't involve FICO scores. So it was completely credit agnostic, which was amazing. And that was thanks to philanthropy. So you can really source capital and do really great work at green banks from a variety of ways. So that's just to get us started. Questions? How are we doing on time? Are we over, Lauren? We're good? Yes. Oh, actually, for the people online, we want to make sure you have a mic. Sorry.
Thank you. Rod Kaufman with BOMA. We're the commercial real estate side of things. How do the green bank lending rates compare to market rates typically?
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the type of green bank and then the market segment that they're looking to go into. The New York Green Bank, for example, tends to only lend actually at market rates. And they sort of say that they're like they say they're one standard deviation off the market. So they might be looking at, say, a new contractor or a new financial structure, not necessarily a new technology. They'll lend into that at a market rate. So that way the private sector will go, actually, this works. This whole thing works. So we'll lend into it like we normally would. Other green banks might look and go, for a smaller nonprofit, they might need concessionary capital. So maybe then they would lend alongside a lender at a below market interest rate to blend the overall interest rate down to be below market. So it really depends on like the type of green bank and the market segment they're looking to solve. Oh, we have a question online.
Yeah, this is a question from one of our remote attendees. What criteria will you use to determine eligible projects worthy of lending? How will you ensure that this doesn't become a system only for the city of Seattle or even just the I-5 corridor?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we are committed to being the Washington State Green Bank, which is why I'm excited that a couple people today are going to represent Eastern Washington on the panel and then our tribal communities in Washington, because we want to ensure that we are not just lending in Seattle, we're not just lending on the I-5 corridor. So we will actively be looking to solicit projects on the east side, and that's going to be the east side of the Cascades, also the Olympia, really all of rural Washington. We're going to be really mindful that we're targeting those segments and ensuring that we help steer project finance there. Rachel, again, yes.
We have another question from our remote listeners. Have you thought about providing financing for, quote, first of a kind, end quote, projects?
That is not something that a green bank traditionally does. They normally would have looked to, say, the loan programs office at the Department of Energy to maybe take more of that project risk. And as they get more towards commercialization, a green bank would step in for maybe a pilot project. But I think that's an open discussion as the DOE LPO potentially is less interested in that sort of work. Will green banks need to expand into that space? So I think that's a conversation that's worthy of having, that maybe we need to pivot a bit. I think we have time for one more. Steve?
Hi. You have a background in housing finance. housing is such a huge concern in terms of affordability, even more than energy poverty. Where do you see opportunities, or do you see opportunities for leveraging a lot of the investment going into housing to also advance green bank goals?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I mean, luckily we have representatives here from the Housing Finance Commission. We have representatives from housing authorities, I believe, online. And I think they're all looking at that exact thing, that how can we help bring down utility costs for the tenants? How can we make the properties better places to live in? You know, I think that what we need, one of the primary recipients of the GGRF was going to be CPC Capital, and they were really going to help try to make a subordinated product that could be lent in below a mortgage to help benefit multifamily at a concessionary interest rate. And as that gets tied up with the federal funding ties, I think that presents the opportunity for the Washington State Green Bank to sort of work with them and the Housing Finance Commission to help make that more accessible, like a very standard, you know, secondary below market loan. Yes. Okay, so I think we need to move on now. We're very, I listened to this podcast called Odd Lots on Bloomberg. I'm not sure if any of you have heard it, but one of the things that Tracy Alloway and Joe Weisenthal, they always say at the beginning of every episode is that they have the perfect guest for the individual topic that they're on. And I feel really fortunate for everyone that's speaking today that we really have the perfect guests. And firstly, I was connected to Kevin from the Connecticut Green Bank. We were talking about electric school buses over emails. And he goes, oh, hey, you know, I'm going to be in Seattle on July 31st. Do you want to meet for coffee? And I was like, ha, ha, ha. I actually have another idea. You work at, you know, what is widely considered like the best green bank, you know, one of the originals. They've had the most impact. Connecticut alone has leveraged billions of dollars. And I was like, I have a different idea. How about you come, you know, green banks are new in Washington, and tell us how things are in Connecticut so we learn a little bit about our friends on the East Coast. So I have the perfect guest to do that, and it's Kevin Moss from the Connecticut Green Bank, and he's going to talk about the Green Bank itself, and then also really excitingly the work they're doing with electric school buses, and maybe we could emulate that here. So Kevin.
Perfect. So yeah, Eli, thank you again. As he mentioned, here on a personal trip with my partner, visiting one of our closest friends in the world, and the timing just worked out that we got to be here. So really, really excited. And yeah, I'll be going through the Green Bank, the Connecticut Green Bank in general, and then kind of walking everyone through a deal that we're doing with Zoom and Brantford Public Schools that we're incredibly excited about. And so, Eli, you teed up a lot of my talking points, and so I'd say that the Connecticut Green Bank, our, general goal is to use limited public funds to de-risk investments, as Eli was saying, and then rally private capital to the clean energy sector. One thing I do want to mention is that in 2022, our mission was expanded to include environmental infrastructure, and so we're currently looking at a lot of kind of on-farm investments, and so that's a new area of innovation for us. And then generally speaking, we just seek to support Connecticut clean energy policy as well. So like I mentioned, our overall goals, the first one there is to rally in that private capital. In our 15 years of existence, we've used about $400 million of public funds to direct almost $3 billion in investment to the Connecticut clean energy sector, which that's a metric that we're really thrilled about, and it's going up over time, which we're also quite happy with. I'd say that most of my work is on the right side of the screen here, so pursuing investment strategies that lead to market transformation, and so we're seeking to do that in the electric school bus space, and then as well with community impact, we see electric school buses as a great opportunity to do that as well. So 15 years in, we have a pretty robust program and portfolio of sectors that we can lend into. That contractor piece that Eli was mentioning is a huge part that really reduces a lot of our origination costs. We're able to get contractors essentially bringing projects to us, and then they are the ones that get to install that equipment. So it leads to this really nice kind of self-perpetuating market. There, in our home solutions space, I think that's a good example of where loan loss reserves can make a really big difference. And so, if you're a Connecticut homeowner and you want to do a, kind of energy efficiency project at your home, you're not necessarily going to be lending from or borrowing from the Connecticut Green Bank. You can go to your, local bank or credit union. They can lend you the money, but our capital is kind of working in the background to de-risk all of those investments. And so that's how we essentially use a bit of public money to make private money go a lot further. And then I work mainly on the investment solution side, and so that's where all of our kind of like bespoke, either company-specific or project-specific investments happen. And then we also run the state's behind-the-meter energy storage program, which I'll mention a little bit as well later on. So moving on to the work that I'm directly involved with, in 2022, Connecticut passed a state-level Clean Air Act, which included an incredibly ambitious electric school bus deployment requirement. And so that's a lot of text on the screen, but I'd say the long and the short of it is that by 2030, we're required to transition all of our school buses in environmental justice communities to electric or a zero-emission technology, and then all of our buses statewide by 2040. So that's about 7,500 school buses that cover the state, and 90% of those are operated by private contractors. And so there's a really, I'd say, collaborative market building effort that we have to undertake because we're working with both the schools themselves and then also the operators that they partner with. One incredibly helpful policy innovation that was included in the Connecticut Clean Air Act is the fact that schools can now, if they want to, and if the contract includes a provision to electrify, they can enter into 10-year agreements with their school bus operator. And so as a green bank, that opens up a much longer investment horizon for us, and I'll go into that a bit more later on as well. And then we have a little bit of state matching grants that we can use on federal awards, which has been really helpful. You may be wondering why there's such a, I'd say, emphasis on clean transportation in Connecticut. A lot of folks don't know this, but Connecticut has some of the worst air quality in the country. Our state environment department likes to say that outside of Los Angeles, Connecticut has arguably the worst air quality. That's a function of a little bit of downwind activity from New York City, and then also the fact that I-95 runs through a lot of Connecticut, and we have a ton of truck traffic as well. And so the investment that I'll be talking about later is in Branford. That's in New Haven County where I live, and that receives, unfortunately, a lot of Fs from the American Lung Association for local air quality. And then as well, we just got 2 more investments approved by our board last week where the asthma figures are closer to 20% for those school districts, so close to 3 times the national average. So obviously not a great situation, but I think we're feeling good about the fact that we're trying to put our dollars where it can make the biggest impact from a public health standpoint. And so this, Eli teed me up again really well. So as he was kind of indicating, green banks don't tend to take technology risk. That's more of a space for the venture capital market. And so this helpful data is from the World Resources Institute. They're kind of the leading, I'd say, policy and market building organization in the electric school bus space. And so if you look down there on the kind of years column, you can see that electric school buses are starting from an awarded standpoint, fewer that are deployed, but they're starting to reach that kind of hockey stick growth that is the point at which green banks feel that, it's kind of a good fit for finance to start coming into the market. And so that's been really helpful. And so in Connecticut, given the fact that this market is growing and we have a really strong state policy mandate, we felt like this was a strategic space to enter. So a little over a year ago, something really exciting happened. So after doing a little bit of background research, I learned that Zoom is one of the school bus providers here for Seattle Public Schools. They were the first and only, at this point, school bus operator to enter into a 10-year agreement in Connecticut using that new statutory authority that I mentioned. And so they partnered with Branford Public Schools on a 10-year, $60 million school bus contract and committed to electrifying the school bus fleet. And so going into the investment itself, Zoom has received 1 grant from the EPA Clean School Bus Program, and Branford has received 1 grant from the EPA Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. And then we've agreed to match that with some of our kind of state matching funds. And so overall, this project is about a $23.5 million project to electrify 49 school buses, install 49 vehicle-to-grid capable chargers, and then electrify do all of the infrastructure work and installation to get all of those chargers in. When this is completed, it'll be as Zoom likes to say, the largest full district electric school bus deployment on the East Coast. And so we were really excited to support this. And so the total financing request came in at around $12 million. So we're in that kind of 50-50 range in terms of the split between grants and financing for this project, which I think we see is a pretty reasonable mix for kind of an early stage technology like this. So in terms of the structuring itself, our clean energy fund, that's that general bucket that Eli was describing. That's the $30 million per year that we receive. So about $25 million of that comes from a ratepayer assessment. So 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour goes from Connecticut ratepayers to the Green Bank, and that helps make up our clean energy fund. And then we also receive about $5 million per year from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in New England. So that makes up our $30 million. We also have wanted to use NCIF dollars, but those are a little bit up in the air at the moment. So we've tried to structure this deal to be essentially eligible to be refinanced through the NCIF if we're able to access those dollars. Otherwise, we're able to move forward with our standard bucket. And so we've essentially structured this as a project finance type transaction like Eli was mentioning. So Branford pays Zoom an annual fee for all of the school bus services, and then Zoom pays us for the cost of borrowing that $12 million. And so we've worked really, really closely with them to essentially line up all of the investment components to Zoom's project deployment needs, to the realities of the school year calendar. Obviously, Zoom gets paid a lot less in the summer months, and so that creates some kind of revenue lumps in their annual earnings. And so we worked with them on what makes sense there. And then they also, entering the East Coast and starting this new engagement with Branford, they have a lot of kind of just like startup and fixed costs that would make it hard for them to pay back a big loan early on. And so we worked really collaboratively with them. And I'd say that this is what all of that payment structuring ended up looking like. So they will be pulling down their first set of funds later this year to get the infrastructure work rolling. So that's all of the wiring and trenching that has to go on to set the stage for installing all of these chargers. And so a very small amount of interest accrues during that construction phase. The bridge loan that we're going to be providing them to match their state grant award, that'll get delivered to them. Those grant funds will get delivered after the project is operational. And so they'll be able to immediately pay down a big chunk of funding there. And then due to those kind of fixed cost challenges, we've allowed them a longer horizon to start paying us back more regularly. And so their kind of principal reduction just goes down a little bit over the first 2 to 3 years. And then after that, we're kind of off to the races in terms of a regular cadence of payments. And so what I want folks to take away from this slide is that green banks aren't effective just because we can offer a lower interest rate. There's also a lot of creativity that can go in terms of working with the project partners to meet their exact funding needs and then coming up with kind of creative solutions like this that work for all parties. And so moving on to, kind of like the case for green banks. Obviously, I work on the kind of the earlier side of things where a lot more public money is involved. I'd say that I really want to emphasize how much low interest finance can play a role in completing like the final 10 to 20% of that capital stack that Eli was talking about. And so in a school bus context, a lot of projects have not moved forward because they've done a lot of planning and then they've realized that they actually have to pay a really large investment fee to their utility to pull more power to the site. That is reasonably, I think, not an allowed grant cost for EPA Clean School Bus awardees, and so a lot of folks have had to send that money back due to that reason. If in those states or communities they'd had a green bank, that may have been something that they could have gotten low interest financing for and allowed those projects to go forward. I think there's also a lot of opportunity to pull in more partners like schools, nonprofits, and small businesses with low interest finance, particularly through that bridge loan financing that Eli mentioned. And that's because a lot of these capital projects, a nonprofit may not have $1 million to $2 million to, just lying around in order to, get to the reimbursement stage of their grant. And so a green bank can lend them that money, and then they pay a small interest fee, and then they get the grant funding at the end, and then pay the green bank back. And so it helps pull in a lot of entities that may not have been able to take on large capital projects before. And then I think that we're also just stepping into a paradigm where, federal funding is likely to be a lot more competitive. And I think states and communities that can communicate that they are not only dependent on grant funding, but they can also integrate finance, I think they're likely to be more competitive with getting access to that funding. So I think there's also a strategic positioning aspect there as well. And then onto the more growth stage opportunities. So I think training the banks is a big opportunity here. So showing that at a slightly lower interest rate that you can still get a really competitive return across a whole host of clean energy investments is really important. And then just like Eli mentioned again, there's a whole host of ways that you can do that with different products for different kind of market needs. And so trying to crowd in that private capital is, once you get past that kind of those tipping points, is really the way to go that we see. And so I think I'm close to time. So I'm just going to leave these thoughts on the board, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this point. Yeah. Oh, just one question. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk about how Connecticut Green Bank sets interest rates?
It's really market dependent, and I would say that we don't want to get in the way of the private market once certain technologies are ready to go. So I'd say the rooftop solar space, we've been, and a lot of the energy efficiency improvements as well, we've been trying to make it so that the private market can come in that regard and not compete too hard on an interest rate basis. I'd say that there's a big, especially with like in the school bus space, if there's a kind of underserved community aspect, then we can offer a lower interest rate as well. That may be a bit of a like market maturity type thing that we can offer, just given the strength, like our history and the strength of our balance sheet. I will say that for the Zoom and Branford project, that if we had been able to offer them a 2% NCIF rate like we had intended, then we wouldn't have had to do all of that kind of massaging and such. They're at a higher rate that I can't quite disclose, and so we're hoping that we can refinance them at the lower rate because that will help de-risk the project. So it's very context specific, I'd say. Great.
That was incredible. Thank you so much, Kevin. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a bother from your vacation. Okay, next, I think it's really important. We've talked a lot about the capital stacks. The federal government has historically played a massive role in our capital stacks for clean energy. And HR 1, the whatever it's called, the bill, the big beautiful thing, that has unfortunately changed the federal landscape quite a bit. That presents some challenges. It's also going to present some opportunities. I think what's really going to emphasize, as Eric was saying, the importance of green banks going forward. But I think it's important that we talk about it and we learn a little bit about what happened with HR 1. So we really do have the perfect guest, and it's Sam Ricketts with S2 Strategies. S2 has been an incredible champion of green banks. They have helped stand up the US Green Bank 50, which is this consortium of green banks across the country. Sam is a Washington native. He's worked in DC. He's an expert on this sort of exact topic. So we're so fortunate to have Sam. So I think we're going to turn to him virtually.
All right, Sam.
Awesome. Terrific. Thank you all. Pleased to be with you here today. And I'm really excited to talk through a presentation we've got from S2 here on the impacts of the HR 1, the one big, beautiful bill. First of all, just as Eli mentioned, S2 Strategies, a bit of an overview of who we are, what we're doing here. S2 Strategies is a clean energy advisory firm working on piloting building solutions on state and federal climate and clean energy policy implementation and finance. As Eli mentioned, we work closely with the US Green Bank 50. We also work directly with states around the country, with other policymakers, NGOs, philanthropy, business to move a clean energy forward. As Eli also mentioned, I've got tied to Washington State. I'm currently an East Coaster. I now live in the wrong Washington. But once upon a time, I grew up in Seattle and worked in Washington State, and wound up working for former Governor and Congressman Jay Inslee for over a decade, including around climate and clean energy policy. So I'm thrilled to be joining you all, thrilled about the work of the new Washington State Green Bank, getting less new all the time, and the ability to work together to move clean energy finance forward in the Evergreen State. All right, so let's just dive in. HR 1, key takeaways. One Big Beautiful Bill Act, notably does a lot of things, but important for our conversation here today, it terminates federal clean energy tax credits and funding programs. I want to give you these top line numbers from projections about what these bill impacts are going to result in, because I think they're worth keeping in mind even as we dive into the details. Projected impacts from this bill having been passed and signed on July 4th, 2025 is one, it's going to increase household and business energy costs throughout the country. We expect numerous projections expected to raise electricity prices in particular, because it's how it's going after new clean electricity supply and ratepayer bills around the country. With estimates between 7 to 10% and $100 to $400 in annual bill increases for homes and businesses. Two, we expect it to eliminate jobs and investment. We're already unfortunately seeing a number of manufacturing facilities either cease construction or terminate their plans for new facilities. We're also seeing, in terms of canceled clean energy projects, I think the group Environmental Entrepreneurs has put out a report showing $22 billion already in canceled investments since the bill has passed. And then three, back on the electricity side in particular, we are expecting it to lead to real reliability concerns, in particular because it undermines incentives for new clean energy capacity to come online, which of course has been the overwhelming amount of new generation supply we've seen added to the grid, especially at a time of rising electricity demand throughout the country. So, what to do now? Well, build. There's still a time to take advantage of some of these incentives before they ultimately expire later this year and next year and thereafter. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the specific details here. I'm going to talk through federal tax credits that are affected, first commercial, then residential. Then I'll hit on some of the other funding programs at EPA, DOE, and so forth that are impacted, and conclude with some thoughts about what to do here now next with this urgent timeline we've got. We will also provide this slide deck here after this presentation, so you all have access in an ongoing way to this information. First of all, commercial tax credits, just sort of in order of expiration here. We're going to see the upcoming expiration later this year of the commercial clean vehicle tax credit for companies to use electric vehicles in their fleets, as well for the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit, which is largely used for EV charging infrastructure. We're going to see the rapid phase out here of solar and wind energy credits using the ITC and PTC, the investment and production tax credits. Other technologies will have a longer runway with those credits. Solar and wind are going to see a very abrupt conclusion, and I'm going to come back to more on that in a second. Other commercial tax credits that are impacted, the advanced manufacturing production tax credit that's leading to such a boom in manufacturing in the country is going to get a chance to continue, but some particular technologies are phased out, like wind energy components. We also see a phase out of an ongoing credit for, but it's a phase out versus current law of the clean hydrogen credit, and as well there's an extension of the fuel production tax credit. One other thing in this space is that the legacy investment tax credit, the one that was replaced by the technology neutral credit in 2025, is going to be around a little longer for geothermal heat pumps until 2033, until 2035. That's actually a thing to note. And then the legacy 10% ICC that's in law is also canceled. I want to turn really specifically to talk about the investment and production tax credits, because that really is sort of the key piece of this puzzle that's going to have dramatic impacts. As I think you all know, under the Inflation Reduction Act, the long-standing ITC and PTC for renewable energy projects was changed into a technology-neutral approach for a wider variety of zero-emission electricity generation and storage technologies. Those credits were supposed to be around until at least 2032. Under what's been passed in HR 1, those credits are rapidly eliminated, specifically for wind and solar. The projects must commence construction before July 4th, 2026, so 1 year after the enactment of the bill, or they must be placed in service before the end of 2027 in order to claim the tax credit. That is a pretty rapid cliff, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the sub-cliffs inside of that cliff, but that is a rapid phase out against current law of what has been planned to get onto the grid from wind and solar energy technologies. Two, the credit is maintained for other zero-emission technologies that include energy storage, but also geothermal, hydropower, nuclear, until the 2033 phase out. And then the credits are also subject to, for all technologies, new prohibited foreign entity rules that kick in starting for tax year 2026. Couple other quick things on the ITC PTC. As I think you probably know, the IRS currently defines beginning of construction threshold through a couple of different tests. One, you start physical construction, or two, if you expend 5% of project costs, you can come in what's called safe harbor. Once you do this, once you meet construction under current IRS guidance, you have 4 years to place that project into service. So you've got 4 years. Once you start those shovels in the ground and meet these thresholds, you've got 4 years to get that project done. You need to, in that period of time, demonstrate continuous efforts towards completion of the project, but it does give you a runway here. But however, as I just mentioned, those timelines are really short for to be able to start those projects. Notably, one other thing that's of note is the July 7th, on July 7th, 3 days after the bill was signed by President Trump, he also issued an executive order tasking the Treasury Department to come forward with new guidance that is even more restrictive to wind and solar projects about beginning of construction timelines and restricting the use of broad safe harbors and ultimately implementing the foreign entity of concern restrictions, the prohibited foreign entity constrictions that I'll get to in a second. And so we are still facing some uncertainty even with regard to how long these credits are actually going to be available, even while we're facing short deadlines to use them. Another quick mention of the prohibited foreign entity restrictions. Under the new provisions that are applied, projects that are using the ITC and PTC and some of the other credits like 45X and 45Z cannot use the credit if they have ties to certain nations and entities established within or controlled by those nations. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, certain other nations put on, and entities put on terrorism watch lists and so forth. Starting next year, if a project commences construction after January 1st, if it receives material assistance from one of these entities, it is not allowed to claim credits. And indeed, if it receives partial credit from these entities, it is only allowed to claim partial credit. That is really a key here because these rules are not yet identified and how these rules are going to be implemented is not yet known. So when I say that you've got until July 4th, 2026 to commence construction, really what I mean is in order to avoid these rules, you got until January 1st, which is a 5-month runway from tomorrow. Couple other mentions of the prohibited foreign entity restrictions, ownership and influence. If you are not just sourcing materials from one of these entities, but if your company has or the project has some tie to the entities based in or related to these entities, you're going to also be having to show that and can't claim credit starting in tax year 2026. We're talking here about partial ownership from an entity based in these countries, issuance of debt to an entity based in these countries, the ability of entities in these countries to have some degree of influence on board members or officers of a company. And again, this all starts within tax year 2026, but some of it can even backdate itself. And there is a payments recapture rule where if you're claiming credit and get afoul of these rules, it can look back and recapture credits. Anyways, this is all to say very complex and onerous and not yet all defined. So the last point here is, of course, if you're working on projects and expecting to use the ITC and PTC hereafter, really work with a tax attorney to understand these vulnerabilities. Let me just hit on, of course, residential credits and then turn briefly to run through some of the agency impacts from the bill. Residential tax credits, of course, were also passed for long terms under the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. They are all rapidly phased out. The bulk of these end in September or in December 31st of this year. We're talking about credits for new electric vehicles, that's September 30th. Credit for used EVs, also the September 30th. 25C and 25D used for residential electric appliances or energy efficiency improvements, residential energy solar installations. All of those will expire on December 31st of 2025. Here, ticking through these. Geothermal heating installations, again, under 25D. The rest of the things you do use 25D or 25C for. The electric vehicle charging infrastructure credit also expires, as I mentioned, the same credit used by businesses, 30C. The credit will expire for projects that are placed in service after June 30th, 2026. So nearly a full year. I'm just going to keep on running through, and pardon I'm throwing so much at you, but there's a lot to talk through. Several other provisions here. I'm just going to bulk these together. IRA impacts to IRA programs and other energy provisions in federal law. DOE programs, the HR1 rescinds funding from the Loan Programs Office. approximately $9 billion in funding to cover projects through the Tribal Loan Guarantee Program, the Advanced Technology Vehicle Program, the legacy 1703 loan program, even the newly created 1706 program. It actually refashions the new 1706 energy program into a new energy dominance financing program that does not have to relate to, no longer does that provision have to support projects that reduce emissions. It can support a broad range of energy projects. Other impacts of DOE is we see unobligated balances rescinded across a range of DOE programs supporting industrial decarbonization, siting of interstate transmission lines, and so forth. At EPA, an even wider number of programs saw their funding, their unobligated funding rescinded. This is money not that's been awarded out to awardees already, but money that's been sitting and has not been obligated, primarily administrative funding. I'm not going to take through them all here, but we're talking about climate pollution reduction grants, diesel emission reduction program, clean heavy duty vehicles, environmental justice grants, and so forth. One thing in particular to hit on, because it relates to the green banking ecosystem in particular, the bill not only rescinds unobligated balances for EPA programs for the GGRF, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that $27 billion fund, it actually repeals the underlying statutory authority for the agency to implement that program and all three of its component parts, the $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund, the $6 billion Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and the $7 billion Solar for All program. We have already seen the EPA, which has been trying to get this program canceled in its entirety, try to use this repeal of its underlying statutory authority to argue before a court where there are cases playing out about the future of these funds and these programs, particularly the NCIF and CCIA. We're already seeing the EPA try to use this as a justification for canceling the program and canceling existing obligated grants. Watch this space. This story is not yet closed. Really briefly, other energy-related provisions. The bill rescinds unobligated balances for IRA programs inside of DOT, USDA, and other programs. It eliminates civil monetary penalties for automakers that run afoul of the CAFE program, which is effectively repealing CAFE standards hereafter, starting year model 2027 and beyond. It mandates increased offshore oil and gas and coal leasing and lowers royalty rates for that production. It also increases fees on renewable energy projects on public lands. That's a lot. Hard to throw it all at you, but want to spin through this and as Eli mentioned, set the table for some of what's to come next. A few conclusions and takeaways. I've got just 2 more slides here. One, what to watch for. Obviously, I mentioned that Treasury is still working through ongoing guidance and rulemaking based upon the executive order. The White House on January 7th tasked it with 45 days to come forward with those guidance related to safe harbor and commence construction and the prohibited foreign entity rules. So we're expecting to see that sometime in mid-August. Could come sooner, could come later. We're also seeing the federal government weaponize this bill already in litigation. As I mentioned, the EPA already going after GGRF awardees and grants. And then, of course, this places a particular burden on state clean energy leadership. By repealing these credits, by cutting grant funding and agency support, the administration has really removed supportive federal policy and investments for state clean energy leadership and has placed extra onus on state leaders to find ways of advancing policy and financing that can continue to build a thriving clean energy economy. And then lastly, very specifically, what to do now. I think there's, with the disclosure of additional rulemaking is coming forward and could impact these credits, a few things to look out for. Which projects, if you're working with solar and wind in particular and other clean energy technologies, what projects can you begin construction on in this calendar year? What projects can you begin construction on if you can't meet this calendar year by July 4th of next year, keeping in mind that you've got to meet those FEOC or prohibited foreign entity restrictions. If you miss those 2 deadlines, which projects using the ITC, PTC in particular, can you have placed in service by the end of 2027? That may be harder to do with utility scale projects, but it'd still be done for CNI projects. Residential projects that use third-party financing can also take advantage of those credits by that time. What vehicles related projects do you have in your pipeline that you can get that you can get executed on before September 30th or with EV charging infrastructure by next June 30th? And then, how can you help consumers take advantage of the short timeline that they have to do home energy audits and get electric appliances and rooftop solar? And then, of course, let me conclude by also mentioning this is not legal advice, and please, especially considering the complexities around some of these tax incentives. It'll be really important to, if you're trying to work this into the capital stack around a project, you consult the tax attorney about what precisely are the new requirements in order to use these credits. They are made complex intentionally, because this is all part and parcel with the administration going after these incentives and these investments and trying to restrict investment into the growing clean energy economy. So that's what I've got. I'll stop my Q&A there. Happy to answer questions, but I know there's a lot to cover in today's agenda. So thanks,
So
Eli.
we have
Thanks
time
all.
for two questions. Two questions, Sam.
Sam, I want your PowerPoint right now. And also, I hope it's recorded. Incredibly helpful presentation. And if we do get a copy of it, are we allowed to share it with our organization in DC and stuff? Because I have a strong suspicion you're going to get a phone call from somebody asking you to speak to the commercial real estate industry's meetings coming up.
Yes, indeed. Well, thanks. And yes, happy to share this, which we can do through organizers hereafter. And please feel free to share it with other organizations and allies.
Hi, you spoke about the impact to states and the weaponization of these tactics. If I'm remembering it right, and I might not be, there was some indication that some of this weaponization would be turned onto the states in particular, meaning that they would have a more difficult time enforcing and funding these types of projects. Is that something that you can speak to, especially for Washington?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, first things first, we definitely have seen this federal administration already go after state authorities to advance and implement clean energy and climate policies. You know, notably the Section 1 through 77 California Clean Air Act waiver that state uses to implement its own vehicle emission standards that are more stringent than the federal government's, and of course have been co-signed by multiple other states, including Washington State. You know, that has been targeted by first the administration and then Congress already for repeal. We've also seen the administration, President Trump issued an executive order in March, or it may have been April, tasking the Department of Justice to start looking into and going after state clean energy and climate policies. Named specifically in the act is policies like climate superfund laws that have been passed by some East Coast states, cap and invest policies that have been passed in Washington and otherwise, and some other policies that we do expect the administration to come for, either through regulatory and or through congressional action. So like states are largely speaking with the policies they're trying to make progress on under the gun. The federal administration is not just targeting federal policies that are trying to support clean energy and climate progress. They're actually going a layer deeper than that and actually targeting state and to some extent local policies supporting that. So states are already kind of under the gun in some respect in this way. Two, like, what does that mean when it comes to actual like states as grant awardees and otherwise? So far, what we have seen since the administration began, you know, we're talking here about the tax credits that are repealed that go directly to projects, which of course, under the Inflation Reduction Act, can be claimed by states and local governments under the elective pay provision. Those provisions are not impacted, but to the extent the underlying credits are impacted, you can't really use elective pay. Some of the grant programs we're talking about here, the HR 1 rescinds unobligated balances. It hasn't gone after, you know, contract awards that are already awarded to states, like the CPRG program award that King County is benefiting from, or the environmental justice awards that are the Solar for All program that the Department of Commerce is implementing in Washington State. So far, those funds are continuing to flow. Those grant dollars are continuing to flow to state and local and tribal governments. We have seen the administration since January start to try to mess with them. Seen them cancel DOE grant awards and otherwise, and we can expect that to continue in an ongoing way. And so states have already been, you know, suing to keep access to their programs or get access to their programs and their dollars. We expect that's going to be an ongoing fight. I'm trying to think of the upshot here. The ultimate takeaway is like states need to both defend what they've got in terms of the dollars and the authorities they hold on to, and it's going to be incumbent upon states. I say states with a little s, and thinking about all the stakeholders that are trying to make progress in different regions of the country to do all they can to continue to hold on to and move the things they've got, and to fill gaps that are going to be left by the federal government pulling back on financing, the federal government trying to get in the way of projects. And so I you know, a couple other resources that may be useful. One, our firm turned around through an initiative we have called the State Support Center, a memo to state government leaders, with recommendations for how they could take advantage of the tax credits really urgently, what to do at the PSC, what to do with your agencies, and trying to get permits executed for both use of the commercial credits and the residential credits, all before the end of this year or next year. Secondly, there's a number of other organizations working on next recommendations to state policymakers about what they should do next, given this dramatic change in federal energy and climate policy. And you know, that's not going to be an easy road to go down, but it's where we are now.
Great, thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Sam. Truly, like, I've read countless articles about HR1, and S2's analysis of it is by far the best in the country. So we're so thankful that Sam joined us. And also that reminder that it's going to be like Washington. We have all the tools we need to step up and hopefully fill that void left by the federal government. So next, we have, as we were talking about, really important that the Washington State Green Bank represents all of Washington. And we have the perfect guest to talk about farming and agriculture and decarbonization in rural Washington, David Funk from Zero Emissions Northwest. He took me on a family combine last week, and as a young boy from outside Boston, I never would have imagined that I would get to drive in a combine and harvest wheat. So that was really cool, and I'm really thankful that David flew out from Spokane to talk to us today. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Cool. Show and tell. So it's wheat harvest right now. So if you want to take one and pass it on, that is one of Washington's main exports. It's soft white wheat, not hard red, and that makes things like wheat thins and rondels. So my name's David Funk. I run a consultancy firm here in Spokane, Washington. I am not a farmer by birth. I am a farmer by marriage. I grew up in New Jersey, which is about 2 hours top to bottom. So living in a state where I can drive 6 hours east to west and not even be through the state is totally different. And I'm here to talk about the gap that we see in finance for farm projects. And ultimately, the gaps are, I'll say 3. One is just farmer access to financing. 2 is bankers' knowledge of farms. How many bankers are here have ever financed a farm project? I'll ask that question. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. There's, 100 people here and more on the slide and more on the Zoom. So it's a totally different financing structure. There's no W-2. There's no FICO score. These fall into the gaps of small commercial problems where you're dealing with challenging things. And if you are a banker and you get handed 10 years of historical bushel yield, what are you going to do with that? As well as building trust in these communities. It is hard, they are far away, and it takes a lot of effort to build trust in these rural communities. That said, I don't know if many people know how much energy farms use. So we're going to kind of talk about that in some of the context, what we're dealing with, because these opportunities are so much bigger than some of the other things that we're talking about, and it's a great opportunity. So here are my in-laws on the right, and everything on the farm is named. So our combines are named Bert and Ernie. Our tractors are Maria and Tony, but we've got about 20 to 30 other vehicles that are all named either Little Blue Truck or Big Boy and all of these stuff. So right now it's harvest. These guys are working 20 days straight, about 15 hours a day, driving 2 combines, 2 tractors, and 3 semi-trucks. They're going to harvest about 6,000 acres of wheat, and that produces about 450,000 bushels of soft white wheat. Right now, we got a little more moisture. This is all dry land wheat, so there's no irrigation, so you're just relying on nature. But 450,000 bushels of wheat is enough for 54 million bowls of ramen noodles. So that one farm could basically feed Tokyo if everybody ate ramen for about a day. This is their only paycheck. In the whole year, they get one paycheck. I mean, they can sell wheat at different times, but it depends on commodity prices. But one paycheck. They're also going through 1,000 gallons of diesel a day. So about 20,000 gallons of diesel to harvest all of that wheat. Right now, they're testing a fuel additive that we've been exploring that could save them about 20 cents per gallon. Washington uses about $300 million of dyed diesel, which is red. You can't take it on road. You don't pay road taxes on it. But that additive could save Washington $25 million per year for the cost of about $1 million. It's one of the lowest hanging fruit that we can kind of see. And everything that we try to bring to a farm, you know, we're not convincing somebody who already wants to buy an EV as their next car. We're trying to convince somebody that doesn't want to buy an EV as their next car to say, this is still a good thing because it hits your bottom line. The largest farm in Washington is up in Brewster, has about 1,600 vehicles. 250 light-duty trucks alone, 400 tractors. They have school buses to take farm workers to fields to pick. They go through about $8 million of gas and diesel a year just to do all of that. They rented an EV Silverado from us. We've got one just to give to farmers. They could save $2.5 million a year in fuel prices for those light-duty trucks, not everything else. It's just light-duty trucks. They're using so much energy, and they benefit from really cheap hydro. So when I think about an opportunity to decarbonize and electrify, I don't really think about the person in Seattle that's driving 7,000 miles and can walk to the supermarket. I think about these people that are driving 200 miles round trip to Costco, that drive 30 to 50,000 miles a year in a 2004 pickup, getting 13 miles per gallon and paying 4 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a huge opportunity, both in electrification because we're driving more miles, but also in financials, putting money back into these rural communities. That same farm uses about 45 million kilowatt hours to irrigate 13,000 acres of apples and cherries. To put that in perspective, we're talking about 1 day of Grand Coulee. So that one farm uses the equivalent of Grand Coulee's production for a day to irrigate. And we have 6.4 million acres of irrigated land here in Washington. Now, a lot of that's gravity fed through a big public works project that happened decades ago, but still, anytime you pump water, it uses energy. Hop kilns. Who likes beer? Lots of people. You generally need hops for beer. Washington produces about 60% of the world's hops. To get that, you need to dry them. You need to put them into a pellet, and you need to get them to Budweiser. That process for one farm in Washington uses 165,000 therms of natural gas in 1 month. That's 500 homes in Washington annually using natural gas they use in a month. They pay demand charges to their utility year-round to be able to draw 165,000 therms of natural gas. We're working with a software company in Yakima that for $150,000 to $200,000, moisture sensors and automated louvers can save 20% reduction. So ultimately, there's so much opportunity within ag, just based on how much energy they use and the type of work that they're doing. From a banking perspective, from a finance perspective, why do I think that this is a huge sector for us to go after? Is number one, it's replicable and scalable. There are only a few farms in Washington that earn about $1 million or more in revenue. So Eli put on a slide that said we had 3.4 million homes in Washington. We only have 2,000 farms that earn $1 million or more. So, you know, 2,000 sounds like a lot, but it's a lot less than 3.4 million. Additionally, what works for one farmer will generally work for their neighbor. They're all doing the same thing. They're all planting wheat, planting apples, harvesting apples, planting cherries, spraying cherries. All of this stuff is very replicable. So if you can get into one farmer, you work with one of the major kind of players in the state, it trickles down to others and people look towards the bellwethers. Secondly, the economic incentives for electrification are very robust. If you can pay 4 cents per kilowatt hour compared to $4 per gallon of gasoline or diesel, that makes a lot of sense. Anytime we can reduce diesel, or reduce gasoline in terms of electrification, we're going to be able to win. Oh, there's Grand Coulee Dam. Lastly, farms think differently about time. They can think multi-generationally. Ugh, sorry, that was not it. They can make decisions for the next generation, not just the next harvest. That was a good line that I had wrote that I screwed up. But this multi-generational perspective means they naturally seek out investments that can pay off over a long period of time. And if you can save a little bit of money over thousands of acres, that adds up, especially since you do the same thing every year, every season, the same fields, the same farm, you're just driving back and forth. Oftentimes it's a satellite nowadays. So if you're thinking, wow, this is awesome, like why doesn't every farmer do this? Clearly this makes sense when you're running the numbers. Agricultural operations have a lot of challenges. First and foremost, they deal with nature. You don't know how much it's going to rain. You don't know if you're going to get a frost. If your whole paycheck depends on dealing and managing with Mother Nature, you're going to do things that kind of don't make sense sometimes. You're dealing with tight margins. As we've gotten better at storing certain commodities, the price comes down. You no longer have good years and bad years. You just have a bunch of mediocre years. Rising labor costs, supply chain inflation makes significant upgrades and capital expenditures really difficult when it's non-core. Are you going to drop $200,000 on a solar system or $200,000 on a new combine? Well, if you're a farmer, I know the choice. There's also a significant aversion to debt. So if you're going to be taking on debt, well, that's the way you lose your farm. So people really try to avoid that. Logistically, it's far from farm to farm. I put on a lot of miles on my car. I took Eli on a 750-mile tour of farms, and we saw 5 farms. So, and then politically and culturally, it's very hard. There's a lot of skepticism for outside programs. The rural-urban divide is real. I've had farmers say that they would never drive an EV truck because of their buddies at the Lions Club. And one time I called a farmer and said, "Hi, it's David Funk from Zero Emissions Northwest." And he said, "Zero emissions? You don't fart?" And he hung up on me. So that's how my cold calling experience goes. Largely, energy is a top 5 expense for farms, but it's often unmanaged because if you're gonna get one paycheck per year, you don't care what the price of diesel is. You're going to burn it. You don't care what's going on in the market. You gotta put the money in the bank somehow. So energy is just the cost of doing business. But when you find projects that have more bang for your buck, not just we're gonna reduce a little bit of diesel, but you're gonna save time, you're gonna save maintenance, you're going to reduce your labor cost. That's where you have co-benefits that can really kind of capture the attention of these farms. So kind of in our approach and what we think the Green Bank would be a great partner for is these opportunities that are very replicable and very high impact. Number one would be software upgrades for kilns and corn dryers. If you're gonna harvest the wheat or the grain, you're going to need to dry it. Variable frequency drives for irrigation, 30% energy savings overnight. Fleet electrification for those that have large fleets, and then ag drones. If you can not drive a 20,000-pound tractor and fly an 800-pound drone, that makes a lot of sense. Collaborating with the kind of vendors, which we've talked a lot about, is working with other people that are essentially selling Green Bank money. Those are the folks that we should be able to provide the financing to, not the farmer. So if we can work with the water specialist, if we can work with the software specialists, we're able to accelerate this. And ultimately, we need to still deal with those 3 things: access, knowledge, and trust. So it takes a lot of effort, and that's basically what our company is doing. We've got our contracts with the USDA, which allow us to gain access to the farmer and say, "Oh, you don't pay me, the USDA is paying me." And that just really makes them a lot more comfortable with working with us. We need to have the knowledge base of finance really kind of come in and say, this is this agriculture market, this is this kind of software package. How do we put that all together? That takes a lot of effort and a lot of people bringing their knowledge to the table and desire to work. But ultimately, why is it bigger than a lot of what we can do and a lot of what we're talking about? So it's easier, it's more replicable, it's more scalable. This is a great opportunity. If we want to have an impact on emissions, on decarbonization, to stay in this space. But it's really about kind of bridging those gaps and all of the knowledge and fostering the relationships that takes time and effort. So ultimately, we are driving around looking for opportunities. And we know that every banker loves a project. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect bankers, along with Eli, to the right opportunities and try to take a bite out of some of this large energy usage. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. We have time for one question. One question.
Hi, thanks for that presentation. I'm curious what you're hearing about agrivoltaics, the opportunity to co-locate solar with crops in a way that might benefit crops and farmers' level of interest in that in Washington.
It is challenging. So one of the reasons why commercial solar is really hard is because you might have a tenant that wants solar, but not the landlord. So if you have a third-party owner of a dual use where you have maybe an apple orchard and you have solar on a bunch of stilts, you can get two things for one, right? I farm sunshine and I farm apples, but there might not be the same entity. So you might have the farmer that wants to grow apples and the solar producer that wants to produce energy. So if you're using agrivoltaics to essentially shade the apples, and it's really, we can go in a lot of tangents about how apples get red and ripe, but there could be some conflicts. There are some pilots that WSU is doing, and I would say that it's not a slam dunk right now, but we always got to kind of find that right solution. But any other dual use, like they're doing it in the East Coast with cranberries, you know, sheep's grazing, that type of stuff, probably more, you know, larger scale ground mount type stuff rather than on stilts will be what pencils.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, the 750 miles we took was just eye-opening. We went to dairy farm, hop farm, potato farm. It was an incredible experience. So we have one more session before we take a break, and then we'll move into the breakouts after that. As we talked a lot about today, green banks are a really powerful tool to help serve historically underserved populations. One of those that we really want to make sure the Washington Green Bank is helping is our tribal communities. So I took a trip out a couple months ago to visit Ray Weissman, who's the general manager of Yakima Power. And Yakima Power is this incredible tribal-run utility on the Yakima Reservation. They employ their own tribal linemen, which is rare amongst tribal utilities, and that's all thanks to Ray's countless work for self-determination for the Yakima. And Ray put me in touch with Seven Skyline, Cheyenne, and Jennifer, because they help him with sourcing financing for his projects. And it's difficult for Ray, and I think it's difficult for a lot of tribes to find the financing they need to help decarbonize and install clean energy. So I really wanted to make sure we learned more about tribal opportunities and tribal needs. So for the last time, we had the perfect guest, added Cheyenne and Jennifer with Seven Skyline. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eli, for the introduction. So my name is Cheyenne Segmiller. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I am based near San Antonio, Texas, but tuning in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So happy to be here and kind of give some more insight about not only renewable projects that tribes are doing right now, but also the creative ways that they're being able to secure the funds for their projects, for their energy projects. Seven Skyline is a woman-owned consulting firm based in Portland, Oregon, led by the amazing Jen Reuter that's joining me now on this call. She'll give her introduction soon. We are a majority Indigenous women staff. We have about 11 people coming from Maine, Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Texas and Arizona. So we're so happy to be able to not only empower like the next generation of energy leaders, but also tribal women as well. So we're very proud of that and very proud that we are able to work with over 40 different tribes across the country, supporting them from phase 1 projects to phase 3 projects. So an example of a phase 1 project would be start an energy plan, being able to be in the community and being able to educate the community members about energy projects. especially if they want to learn more about solar or wind or hydro, whatever different things that pique their interest. We're happy to be able to be there to help them out. An example of phase 3 project would be more of a utility scale project, kind of similar to what Yakima Nation is doing right now with Ray Wiseman, being able to make sure that the project is owned by the tribe, it's on tribal land, and it not only benefits tribal members, but it also is able to become an economic development opportunity for the tribe to be able to make sure that there's renewable energy sources, that it's reliable, and that the tribe produces its own power to be able to power the homes for the tribal residences there. So we're very proud that we're able to help in these different initiatives, especially being so early in the clean energy field for tribes. Historically, tribes, are usually on the back burner when it comes to state policy and federal policy. So we're very happy that tribes are wanting to take this initiative towards tribal sovereignty and really ensuring that tribal energy sovereignty kind of stays at the forefront for these tribal leaders. So we're very happy to support them in these endeavors, connect them with different developers and nonprofits that want to be able to help support their missions and to be able to give back to the community as well. So we're very proud about that. And we're so happy that these tribes want to keep going with these projects regardless of the federal climate that we're in right now. And so we're happy to be able to connect them with the people who are interested. They want to be able to work with tribal people and be able to support their projects. So Jen can give us some more information about the work that we're doing right now.
Thanks very much, Cheyenne, and thanks for inviting us out, Eli and Washington Green Bank. As Cheyenne mentioned, we serve as a bridge, just like the previous speaker, trying to help tribes understand what their options might be. My background is a technical one. I've been involved in developing renewables, the utility scale for the last 10 years, including large transmission, solar, and storage. And tribes have an enormous opportunity. Nationally, tribes have about 5% of the US land base. There are 574 federally recognized tribes and a number of state recognized tribes as well. And you might think of a lot of tribes in Alaska or the Southwest or California, Oklahoma, but actually Washington has a lot. There are 29 tribes in Washington state, and the Yakima Nation has over 1 million acres. And a lot of that has potential for renewables development. But what's really important and what we have at the forefront is that tribes should be in charge of where and if they want to develop renewables. And so we empower tribes through energy planning and other methods and outreach with the communities to understand what they want to build, where they want to build it, and when they want to build it. And then we go from there. And over the last 10 years, I've been working in tribal communities, and I've been delighted to build our team to include Cheyenne and a number of other members to have a group that reaches out across the state of Washington to talk with different tribes about their opportunities. And we now have multiple projects, not just at Yakima, but at other places that are getting ready for the last hurdle. That last hurdle is to get the financing lined up to be able to put the project into construction. And when the IRA came out, it was really exciting because finally there was some funding available to tribes through grants or reimbursable loans to manage the planning process. Because as you know, planning renewables takes time. You don't just throw up a bunch of solar panels in a field. If it's anything larger than something you would want for a family, you have to go through a permitting and potentially interconnection process. And feasibility studies are required, and tribes just did not have resources or staff capacity at the tribes to lead those activities. So that's what Seven Skyline has been doing, is helping to get those preliminary studies done so that the tribes have a project that's then ready to go into financing. The challenge is that tribes often aren't able just to walk into Key Bank or Wells Fargo and ask for a loan and get that to go ahead and build their project. And so what we need to do is continue to be a bridge, and that's where Washington Green Bank can be a partner. And Seven Skyline is working with several philanthropic lenders that recognize that in this time of federal funding uncertainty, it's important for us to build some more partnerships, some public, private, tribal partnerships. And that's where green banks, native CDFIs, and other impact investors can come in and provide below market financing for tribal projects. And we have been able to connect several tribes that were right in the middle of a project when their funding got pulled, so they could get a bridge loan until that funding could get restored. Or they want to go through the Solar for All program, which is still live, which is very exciting. It's still live. That means a lot of solar for lower income families in Washington and tribal families too. And so, but those projects often need to have bridge funding in order to put those projects on homes as well. So our team helps provide technical and financial resources for tribes that want to move in the energy space. And we'd love to partner with Washington Green Bank and other funders in order to get the bridge capital released, hopefully, very soon, like in the next few months. Tribes need this money to be flowing so they have the cash flow to build their projects. And that's a space where we will be supporting tribes over the next few years. I'm happy to take any questions that folks from the conference might have. I'm also calling in remotely today. I'm in Wyoming, working with some tribes out here this week, but normally I can be found in Portland, Oregon, and so happy to also meet with folks in person if that would be helpful.
Thank you so much. We'll take some questions here. Any questions here in the room?
Hi, Owen Freed with the UW Clean Energy Institute. I'm wondering if Seven Skylines provides like electrical engineering services, or if it's sort of on the burden is on the tribes to actually do the design of large scale energy projects.
Usually the tribes don't have an electrical engineering team available, so we do the permitting, planning, interconnection, transmission engineering, and then we have a series of partners provide the detailed design. Often a tribe, especially if they have funding coming in, will want to issue an RFP to hire the folks to do the EPC to actually build the project. So we help as a bridge to help set up the tribes for success in that space. And there are a lot of companies in Washington that are eager to support tribes. We work with groups like HDR and Cezanne Group and several others that are already actively out on the reservations working with tribes. Bar Engineering is another one. So yeah, we connect them with the resources to build the project, not just design and fund it.
Hi, Steve Winkleman from Green Resilience. I recently moved from Canada, and 20% of new clean energy capacity in Canada is Indigenous owned. I'm curious if you're connecting with groups like Indigenous Clean Energy. If not, I can help connect you.
We are, in fact, and it's really exciting to see the First Nations build projects and own them up in Canada. They're a little further along in some ways than we are here, but the interest in tribal ownership is very strong. And sometimes tribes will still need development partners for various things. Also, transmission upgrades are necessary, and those are very expensive. And so sometimes tribals utilities will partner with non-tribal utilities for transmission expansion. But no, the model that Cheyenne talked about as well is encouraging tribal ownership is really important for energy sovereignty and also long-term sustainable revenue for tribal energy, from tribal energy projects. So happy to collaborate with our First Nations neighbors and learn lessons from them. And we have several that have come down and spoken with us at different conferences. So I would say happy to take any connections that you might have. We will follow up on them.
Thank you both so much.
Okay. We're really lucky to have a video from Gwen. Gwen Yamamoto runs the energy part of the Hawaiian Green Infrastructure. And if you have ever been to Hawaii, it's almost impossible to say the impact that Gwen has had, not only in Hawaii in terms of expanding energy efficiency and particularly solar in the residential space on Hawaii, but the impact she's had across the country. We basically all look up to Gwen as leading the way when it comes to what a state, what a green bank, what utilities can do for innovative financial mechanisms. What she's done for Hawaii is incredible. So we're so fortunate that she took some time at the airport, I think, flying to Molokai to record a video for us. So we're going to play that now.
Aloha from the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Authority, Hawaii's Green Bank. I'd like to give a big shout out and congratulations to all of you on the formation of the Washington State Green Bank and appointment of Eli as your executive director. I'm sure you will agree that you're very lucky to have Eli, who brings passion, experience, expertise, and relationships vital for strategic partnerships to your Green Bank. The authority, a state agency, was constituted in 2014 when our legislators found that early adopters to solar were affluent ratepayers, and they were rightfully concerned that underserved ratepayers like low and moderate income households, nonprofits, and small businesses, those who can least afford it, would be stuck supporting an aging grid infrastructure. Our mandate was threefold. First, to make clean energy investments accessible and affordable to Hawaii's underserved ratepayers, which is translated to mean to provide financing to people and organizations that banks and credit unions are not comfortable lending to. Second, to stimulate private investments, which means one of our goals is to leverage scarce public funds with private capital to loan to people and organizations that banks and credit unions are not typically comfortable lending to. And three, to accomplish this by leveraging innovative financing tools to mitigate risks and reach new markets. We were initially capitalized with the net proceeds of a $150 million green energy market securitization bond. Hence, our program is often referred to as a GEMS financing program. Securitized bonds are typically approved and issued by the state, but it's not an obligation of the state. It is repaid by ratepayers as a fee, similar to a public benefits fee, on their utility bill. Because of this financing structure, we were able to obtain an excellent rate of 2.99%, and our GEMS bond has remained AAA rated even through the pandemic when the state's bond rating dropped, as well as after the Lahaina wildfires. Through the good work and collaboration with stakeholders like you, as well as the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission and our investor-owned electric utility that services 95% of the ratepayers in the state, we launched our Green Energy Money Saver On-Bill Financing Program in 2019. While this tariff on-bill program eliminated credit barriers in that we were no longer needed to pull credit scores during our underwriting process, it still had disconnection notices as a credit screen. Therefore, if an applicant received any disconnection notices over the previous 12-month period, we were not able to finance them. However, in 2023, the Public Utilities Commission approved our request to eliminate the disconnection notice credit screen based on the strength of the risk mitigating on-bill repayment financing mechanism demonstrated by our portfolio performance to date, including during the pandemic, and I'm so proud to report that we have not suffered any losses yet. I'm knocking on wood. With the elimination of all credit barriers and the legislature appropriating an additional $50 million in general funds to finance solar plus storage for low and moderate income households, we received over 1,600 loan applications in 2024, reflecting a pent-up demand from our underserved sector. With the $62 million Solar for All award under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we are excited to expand our financing beyond residential, commercial, and multifamily solar to also include community solar. And we are actively working on financing a 2.45 megawatt community-owned community solar project on the island of Molokai, which will provide electricity savings for up to 1,500 homes and businesses on an island with one of the highest poverty rates in the state. A 4 megawatt community solar project on Oahu, 2 3 megawatt community solar projects on the Big Island, 1 2.5 megawatt community solar project on Maui, and a few smaller 250 kilowatt projects on Department of Hawaiian Homelands for our native Hawaiian ratepayers. While the authority clearly does not have enough loan capital to finance all of these projects, our leverage, even a small percentage of the total capital stack, is critical to the other capital providers as subordinated debt, and more importantly, for access to our on-bill repayment mechanism. This is exactly in alignment with our mandate to stimulate private investments by mitigating risk and expanding access for underserved ratepayers to lower their energy burden. While we are all in uncertain times due to the changes in the federal tax credit, as I have shared with our Public Utilities Commission last week, one thing is certain. Green banks like ours that provide low-cost, long-term flexible financing to underserved ratepayers will be one of the few options left post-federal tax credits to help our underserved lower their energy costs while helping to achieve the state's clean energy goals. Best of luck to all of you as you embark on your green bank journey, and please feel free to reach out if I can ever be of assistance. Aloha and mahalo.
Gwen's just the best. Okay, so we're gonna move into the breakout session portion now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna split the room. So this half to the left, or right in the two there, so right down the middle, to the left, we'll go to the boardroom, which is around the angle there, and you'll meet your facilitator, Vin, in the boardroom over there. And then the middle to the right will stay here in the main room, and you'll meet your facilitator, Cheryl, who will help you through the breakouts. And then for our online folks, Jared will be able to provide you with instructions, and you'll be working with Kevin, who will help facilitate online. So thank you all, and excited for the breakouts.
All right, everyone online, hang tight for just 2 minutes. 2 minutes. We will organize breakouts real fast and send you instructions, so stand by. Thank you.
Oh, he's online. He's online. Yeah. Hey, great job. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, my memory was awesome. Yeah, no, really. Think about it. Perfect.
Once again, everyone online, hang tight for just one moment. We'll be sending you a link to a separate breakout meeting. So stand by, and I'll walk you through exactly how to get over there. Thanks so much. If everyone on the virtual meeting will please open up the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We're going to send you a link in just one moment. At the bottom of your screen on the toolbar in Zoom, click on the Q&A and give us 2 seconds to send you a link. Stand by.
It's a different world.
All right, everyone, you should have received the link in the Q&A. Ensure that you have opened up the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Go ahead and click on that link. We'll begin the meeting in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, everyone, please make your way into the other meeting room. You should be in the waiting room of the next breakout meeting. I will admit everyone in just one moment.
Question number one. What are the most significant clean energy financing gaps you see in Washington State? We'll break that down by residential
that's the biggest part. It's that back end financing. It's usually a bridge of anywhere from 60 to 180 days that has to be covered. And that's the same in solar. It's the same. It doesn't really matter. They all work in parallel lines.
I'd say commercial as well. I will say how we finance stuff and how we fund stuff is very inefficient. So to put this in perspective, Massachusetts for $1 billion gets 3.2 gigawatts of solar. If we were to do that, we would do maybe 3.2.
All right, everyone, still in the main webinar. Make sure that you open up the Q&A. You should be able to, one moment. You should be able to click on the Zoom link for the breakout meeting. It is a separate breakout meeting. And I have a few open Q&As, and I'll make my way through those right now. Stand by.
Which incentivizes contractors to jack up the price because they need to wait for the funding. And they're like, well, I need to make it worth it. I got to make a 45% margin on this deal.
Or they have access to the awardees because it's all public. And it's funny, in the EV space, if a business gets awarded $600,000 for charging stations, guess how much the charging station costs? $600,000. Then what about the transformer? What about the service upgrade? What about the dirt work, the trenching, and all that stuff? Nobody has a bottom line approach, that we've seen outside of us in our arena. We always I'm an ex-banker, so I always come in bottom line first, look at, how are we going to make this all work within budget and get it done, but that's just not how it works. Like you said, everybody's hiking up everything, and they're like, hey, well, the money's there, let's max it out. Not thinking about all the other moving parts of the project.
So that's like a commercial real estate, like holding period.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's come on back right now.
Will that go on Zoom?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So you're just get everybody back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. If we could start making our way back, that'd be great. Thank you to all our Zoomers for hanging on there. Really appreciate it. Just have a couple wrapping moments, and then we'll be ready for lunch here. I think, Jared, we could just go to the closing slide. Awesome. Well, I just really can't thank you all enough for coming out today. I mean, we were trying to figure out, like, we had so many people registered, and we were like, what's the normal, like, attrition rate on an event? Like, is it 50%? Like, we just didn't know. And, we had, like, I think 90 name tags, and only like 10 are empty. So, like, not a lot apparently for the Green Bank, so that's great. So just thank you all so much for coming. Everyone online, thank you for participating from wherever you are across Washington, taking part in the breakouts. And then I just really want to thank 9-0 for hosting us. Lowell and Laura have been great in getting ready for the event, and thank you to Lauren and Jared for doing all of the tech. I mean, it's been seamless. It's amazing. And Garmondo's for the food. It's just thanks to everyone who helped put on this event. Vin and Cheryl and Rachel from the board and all of our board members. I think, can't speak for the internet, but for here in the room, I think we had some really engaging conversations. we learned that there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of opportunities. I think the optimism is there, and this is just the beginning for the Green Bank. We're just gonna, we want this to be an ongoing dialogue for everyone to help shape our future. So thanks for getting us going. And for those of you here, lunch is ready, and just kind of eat and mingle, and then leave as you see fit. But thank you everyone so much again for coming out. Take care.